Happy Friday and welcome to another episode of BrainScratch. I'm John Lordan. Thank you so much for joining me here today as we look into a cold case. This is a case that's going to be 40 years old next year. And it's one of those cases where there doesn't seem to be a lot of details. It's a case where a lot of people might ask, is law enforcement handling this well, particularly communication with the family? Now, before I get into this, there wasn't a ton of online sources, so I've had to lean on a family member in particular. I want to thank her. She is the niece of today's victim, and she'll be on a little bit later to help fill in some of the gaps for us in this story. Today, we're talking about the death of Catrina Diane Mowrey, also known as Catrina. Let's go ahead. I do have some photos, and we do have a couple of sources that we're going to sprinkle in as we go along here as well. So Catherine, who would eventually go by Catrina, was the first of three girls born to James and Catherine Mowrey on February 5th, 1961. And although today we'll be looking into her officially undetermined death, yet extremely suspicious death, it wouldn't be the first time that she was a victim of a crime. Back in 1966, those three sisters were kidnapped from their grandparents' yard by their biological father. He took them from Kansas to Dallas, Texas. Their mother would search for them for over a year. Thankfully, the girls would be reunited with her. And we've got another photo here of Catherine. Catherine would grow up and live in Lawrence, Kansas for some time. According to news articles, her mother states that she moved away as an adult and then she headed back to Texas. Now, she was interested in real estate. She had even become a licensed realtor in the state of Kansas before her move back to Dallas. However, once in Dallas, she didn't really continue pursuing that career. She eventually got a job working as a waitress at a country club in the Dallas area. And at work, Catherine noticed that the Hispanic ladies there called her Catrina, and she liked it. It stuck. So from that point forward, she would be known as Catrina. In 1985, Catrina was living in Dallas and known to have friends that were involved in the Dallas drug scene. There's even some questions about, was she involved in that drug scene as well? There's one police report that I've reviewed that suggests she may have been selling a prescription opioid at the time. And of course, that lifestyle might have brought along its own dangers. As a matter of fact, in May of 1985, a man kicked in her apartment door. He had a loaded weapon. Thankfully, law enforcement was nearby on a completely unrelated call. They witnessed the incident. They intervened. They arrested the man. We'll refer to him as Dan from now on, because obviously with her suspicious death, we're talking about possible persons of interest, and this attack happened a matter of weeks before her death. He was charged with unlawful carrying of a weapon, and he pled guilty to that charge. In mid-June, Catrina was making plans to drive home to Kansas to visit her younger sister, Deborah, and some other family members. Things weren't going great between the sisters. I don't have all the details. I'm hoping that we can ask Deborah's daughter, who's going to join us, about that. They had recently gotten into some form of argument on the phone, and Deborah actually wound up hanging up on Catrina. However, before Catrina could make that trip, something tragic would occur. On Tuesday, June 25th, 1985, at 4:52 p.m., Dallas police were called to a scene in an alleyway in the Oak Cliff neighborhood. And let's go ahead and just learn a little bit about Oak Cliff. Oak Cliff is an area of Dallas, Texas that was formerly a separate town. It has many parks and is near the central business district of downtown Dallas. There are no officially recognized or universally accepted boundaries for what constitutes Oak Cliff. And this is an area that seemed to be doing well for a while and then wasn't doing so great, became a lot of low-income housing. And according to Deborah's daughter that we're going to be speaking to, this wasn't exactly the best part of Dallas, especially through the 1980s. We do have a map here we can kind of pull up of the location. And there are a couple of alleys here. I'm not sure exactly which one. We can see there's kind of a small alley right here off of South Marcellus Avenue. But interestingly, there's kind of two reported locations for where police responded to, one being over on the left, the other being kind of on the right. And we see we have an alley over here as well, two alleys on this side. I'm not 100% sure which alley, but this is the general area where this is taking place. And of course, we're looking at a satellite view that is current. Just something that sticks out to me about the possible location here. And once we get to the details, it's going to seem like this is potentially a dump site. It's where her body was taken and left. Seeing that it's so close to a freeway, very, very close to a freeway, it just has me wondering, did someone say, I've got to get her away from the location where the actual crime scene is, and they drove to this location, jumped off the freeway, took a couple streets up, saw that there was an alley that looked kind of dimly lit, or for some reason they thought would be a decent level of protection, and then just used that alley and left. There is another question in terms of how they left, though, because the car, seemingly that she would be transported in, was actually left there. So they were called to that alleyway. They discovered a blue 1978 two-door Ford LTD, and inside that trunk was a body. We do have a few articles that we've been able to get, once again, thanks to that family member. Woman's body found in car trunk. Dallas police recovered the badly decomposed body of a woman that had been locked in the trunk of a car parked behind a South Oak Cliff apartment complex. Now, that description makes it sound more like, the parking area kind of behind the apartments, but a lot of the other descriptions I'm reading are being fairly clear that it's an alleyway, so I'm still leaning that direction. We have an official with the medical examiner's office quoted here. All we know is that she is a white female. They haven't processed her body as of when this article was written. The body was discovered after Southwest Station police officials responded to a call Tuesday afternoon from Sonia Harvey, manager of the Casa 3 apartments at 200 South Marsalis Avenue, a police report indicated. The report said Ms. Harvey reported an odor coming from the car. She said she noticed that the automobile had been parked in the east alley between Marsalis and Lancaster. Well, there we go. The alley right between these two. Once again, I'm just not sure which side, but if they're saying the east side, it's leading me to believe it's probably this alley over here on the right. And she said that it had been parked there since Saturday night. Police officers said that they saw flies inside and outside of the 1978 Ford LTD. They had the trunk pried open and they saw the body wrapped in a stained white sheet. Homicide investigators were tracing the ownership of the car Tuesday night. Investigator Harold Rice said the car has done a lot of hand changing in the last few months. It's gone from one car lot to another. Rice said the car has had 5 owners and the first 4 have cooperated with the investigators. Interesting. We're still checking it out. He said, we're having to contact car lot owners from home. That's why it's taking time, but we'll continue until we'll find something. So not only had Catrina's body been found wrapped in a white bed sheet, there was some form of belt wrapped around her neck, securing the blanket. And I'm saying some form because I've seen it described a few different ways. Some are saying like cloth belt. Others are just saying belt. Some are saying, I think, a piece of fabric or a piece of cloth. But there was something fastening the sheet around her neck. However, there was another belt, I believe, under the sheet as well. Under that, she was wearing no clothing. And also worth noting, her glasses were not found with her. They were found back at her apartment. And this car was parked over 6 miles away from where she was living at the time. Without her glasses, she was considered legally blind. So the thought that maybe she could have driven there, for some reason, there's some question about the possibility that she took her own life. I think this is a very bizarre scene to come to that conclusion, but it's an early conclusion that is floated towards the family. It was Dallas in June. We're talking temperatures that reached up into the low 90s, and her body sitting in a trunk. So obviously decomposition well underway, and with the temperature and the trunk location, also decomposition accelerated. As a matter of fact, upon immediate inspection, there didn't seem to be any obvious wounds to her body, and she would be identified later using her fingerprints. Her family was contacted and initially told that Catrina had likely ended her own life. Once again, just a bizarre conclusion. I don't know that I've ever heard of a scene staged in that way. I mean, why would you wrap yourself up in a blanket, put yourself in a trunk, lock yourself in a trunk? However, police had a different story that they were sharing with news reporters at that time already. And that is woman in car trunk died of overdose. Police said Wednesday that a woman found dead in the trunk of a car on Tuesday apparently died of a drug overdose. Dallas Homicide Sergeant H.M. Rice said the woman was identified as Catherine Diane Mowrey, 24 years old, very young, of Dallas. Rice said investigators believe the woman was placed in the trunk after she died. So very clear there that he's thinking there's some form of interaction. Someone else is a part of this story. Quote, "We speculate that she died on somebody and they just got scared and put her in the trunk. It's not going to be classified as a murder because we don't know who put her in there." Now, it's very interesting phrasing that is kind of baffling a little bit to me. We speculate that she died on somebody. So it's clear that this whole overdose idea is, and this is a common theory when we're talking about cases like this. It's always something that pops up in the comments from one of you viewers out there. What if, this person was at a party, they had a little too much and they had some type of event, cardiac arrest or something along those lines, and then the people at the party had to get rid of them. So it seems like here we have law enforcement kind of drawing that same conclusion. Rice said that there was some evidence that the woman had taken cocaine, but medical officials said it would be at least 2 weeks before toxicology tests could determine the cause of death. I'm really curious about that. How do you come to a conclusion like that? Did they find some form of paraphernalia? Did they see something on her body that would suggest that? Rice said Ms. Mowrey's mother, who lives in Kansas, told him Wednesday that she did not know what the woman had been doing in Dallas since she left Kansas at age 18. What I'm finding very interesting, for lack of a better word, about this article is even with this reasoning, even if they're correct about the cause of death, we're still talking about a crime that occurred here. Someone moved, they transported, and they hid her corpse. Another consideration is that police were making that statement even though toxicology reports haven't been completed yet. And there was another very important fact. The car was owned by a man believed to have some relationship with Catrina. They were dating each other in some way. We'll refer to him as Steve for the rest of this video. And according to public records, it seems that Steve was married at that time. Catrina had apparently borrowed this car for the 2 weeks prior to this incident. So I don't know how close they were. I don't know how often they were seeing each other. But at a minimum, we know that he has some interest because this is his piece of property. His piece of property found with someone that he was having some form of a relationship with in it, deceased. Admittedly, we don't know what led to her death. Information from the medical examiner would only shift perceptions and raise new questions. They estimated that Catrina had died only 2 days before being found, which causes a little issue with that timeline because remember, she's found on Tuesday, but we have the apartment manager saying that that car had been there since Saturday. So either we have the estimation, maybe the estimation is loose for some reason. I know most of the time when it comes to those estimations, they're doing it based on body temperature. I know sometimes they will be looking at stages of decomposition. Sometimes they will look at, the fact that there was flies already buzzing around. So there's a certain period of time it takes for that to happen. I'm not sure what drew the conclusion on the 2 days. Just a little bit of an interesting question when it sounds like it should have been more like 3 or 4 days that her body was there. But maybe more important than that, those toxicology results, they show that there were no drugs in her system at the time of death. And you can actually see a little screenshot of them there right at the bottom of the screen. The only thing noted was alcohol, and it's a 0.07. Of course, that can happen during decomposition as the body starts breaking down. That level can kind of go up as it is. But when it comes to drug screen, negative. And they tested in several different ways. They tested blood, they tested vitreous humor and some other ways. So no drugs found in her system. That also throws a bit of a question towards this conclusion of, maybe she was involved in the drug scene in some way. Shouldn't there have been some form of narcotics in her system if that was true? The autopsy report also has some interesting statements here, particularly there is no evidence of injury. So it's mind-blowing. They say that outside of decomposition, her heart looks unremarkable. So we've got no drugs, we've got no obvious trauma that has happened to her heart. This idea that she died of a drug overdose and was hidden, simply hidden, doesn't seem to be holding up. Now, I don't know if there's other types of symptoms that can happen from overdoses, maybe something with the lungs, something, it has to be something immediate, obvious to take a person's life. There's no traces in this autopsy report of any type of overdose scenario that I can find, at least. And admittedly, I'm not an expert, but there's just no signs of it. But on top of that, there's no evidence of injury. And that's even with this information about the possibility of something being around her neck. They checked her neck. There's no injury to her neck either. So how exactly did Catrina die? Just as important, why wasn't this information provided to her family? That autopsy report that we just looked at, family only got their hands on that a few years ago. Most of them at the time went on believing what was being reported in the news, believing that it was a drug overdose and simply going on with their lives. Well, most of them except for her sister, Deborah, who was convinced the entire time there was something going on here. It was definitely foul play. Catrina was buried back home at Oak Hill Cemetery in Lawrence, Kansas. Her obituary stated that her death was still under investigation. And that's what Deborah believed too, because she believed, and I think rightfully so, that there was a foul play scenario going on here. Unfortunately, this family would experience even more loss. In 1993, Catrina's sister, Joanne, murdered in Dallas, only about 5 miles away from where Catrina's body was found. A suspect was arrested and prosecuted in that case, and the two sisters' deaths are believed to be completely unrelated. But what a tragic set of circumstances for this family to be going through. And unfortunately, that's not the end of it. So in 2020, Deborah and her daughter kind of spins up a new search on this, gets very interested in this case, and works with Deborah, and they obtain a copy of the death certificate for Catrina, and they're very shocked to learn what her listed cause of death is. And here we're looking at a screenshot of it, undetermined. So the thought that police were processing this case, looking into it as a homicide, she thought it was foul play this whole time. She is now learning over 30 years after the fact that her sister's death is in a state where it's undetermined. And I have to ask the question, would that affect the priority of how this case is being investigated? And I think it's fair to assume, yes, it would. I think if you have a death that is determined to be a homicide, they're probably going to bump that up in terms of priority because they know they have a murderer walking the streets freely. Undetermined, you don't know that for a fact. There's certainly a possibility, but you're not 100% sure. And I don't know about you guys, but even the gist that we got, and admittedly, we've read a few comments that have been put out in press at the time. The urgency around this case, it seemed like there was a quick conclusion that the Dallas PD moved to on this case. And then the information that kind of counteracts that came in weeks later, seemingly wasn't communicated back to the family. Is all of that accidental? Was it just missed because of case prioritization? This thing kind of hit in the back burner. Those toxicology report results come in a few weeks later. They're off into other cases. The person whose desk it falls upon, it's just the urgency of that information doesn't stick out. I don't know, but in some bizarre way, the communication that should have been happening between law enforcement and the family and these very important facts just did not come across. So with this new information, this hits Deborah really hard. She thought that this case had been actively investigated for the past 35 years. And Deborah, the last remaining sister of those three, ended her own life within 1 month about hearing this information, the undetermined cause of death. We have a picture of Deborah with her daughter here. And while there's no formula to break down why someone would end their own life, Her psychiatric records certainly reflect that Catrina was always on Deborah's mind. In one particular statement, she said that she was having hallucinations and she was looking in the mirror, brushing her hair, when Catrina appeared in the reflection. She also noted that whenever she experienced any type of traumatic event, and unfortunately this is a family that has faced many, it always took her right back to that moment where Catrina died. Her daughter, Deborah's daughter, is convinced that learning that the case wasn't really being worked on actively was a factor that just basically pushed Deborah over the edge. Now, a few years later, Deborah's daughter would receive a copy of the autopsy and toxicology reports. Of course, we know they found no drugs present in her system. That was another detail that the family had not known before. And then, of course, the mention of the items found around her neck, but there being no trauma to her neck. So Deborah had always felt that a man who went by the nickname of Pee-wee was responsible for Catrina's death. She knew that Catrina and Pee-wee had moved to Houston together at some point for a period of time. However, whenever she would ask authorities about this, they said, we can't figure out who this Pee-wee guy is. We can't track him down. We have no idea how to pin down his whereabouts. And that was kind of the last that she understood about trying to find out who Pee-wee was. At least that's the last that she was told by Dallas PD. Now, in 2023, I think it's not too far of a stretch to say, because of the work that Deborah and Deborah's daughter put into trying to re-raise awareness on this case, Dallas PD would do this kind of small blog entry about it on Cold Case Tuesday, Catrina Mowrey's case. And as we can see here, Mowrey misspelled for some reason several times on this. And it's basically 1, 2, 3 sentences, not a ton of information. Keeps raising the question for me when I look at cases of this age, and especially, with some of the success that we've seen for law enforcement that reaches out to people in the social media space and opens up to them with details with super old cases like this. Like, just cut these details loose. It's 40 years at this point. Like, there's a chance that the person that is responsible in this case isn't even alive, or they could be incarcerated. There's so many different possibilities. And as these cases age, you have witnesses that are passing away. You have evidence that's deteriorating. Like, I wish there was some mechanism for automatic controls when it comes to law enforcement information. And hey, if this case isn't solved by X amount of time, then a new packet of information releases, or some other organization is able to come in, review the records, and figure out a new approach with the press to try to re-raise exposure or reinvestigate the case in some way. There's got to be some better way than this. There's got to be some better way than 3 sentences on a blog with a name misspelled over and over. But another interesting thing about these 3 sentences: homicide, nowhere in these 3 sentences. And admittedly, that's got to be tough when we have the determination from the medical examiner stuck in undetermined, but maybe that should be part of this process. As it's re-reviewed, have another forensic pathologist take a look at it, evaluate the possibility of changing that ruling. Like, is that too much to ask for these families that are waiting decades for justice and then finding out later that what they thought was something that was being worked on likely wasn't? And as you're going to hear, once Deborah's daughter got involved and tried to trace records and find the status of this case, it's kind of a mess. And it's clear that at least initially, as she gets involved with this, it's not being treated as a homicide at all. What it boils down to: no drugs found, no trauma to the body, but the body wrapped in a sheet, 2 items around her neck, and no cause of death. How did Catrina die? And how does her family find the truth and justice in her name? Now, Catrina's parents have since passed away, as well as both of her sisters, but Deborah's daughter, who bears a very familiar name, is looking for answers. So with that being said, let's introduce Catrina Marshall to the show. Thank you so much for joining us. And she's joining us without video because unfortunately she has COVID right now. Catrina, are you feeling okay?
Yeah, I'm medicated, so I'll be all right for a while.
Okay, okay, good. Well, we appreciate you taking the time and joining us here today. And before we get into everything, I just wanted to say that, of course, I'm really sorry for the loss of your aunt, but I'm also sorry for all these other losses that I've learned about in your family, including, of course, your mother in all of this. A lot of tragedy and just a lot of pain that you've had to deal with. And I just want to let you know that we're out here feeling for you in all this. So.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to start by asking, what does it mean to you to be named after a family member whose life has been taken like this?
I would say it's definitely something personal, like, kind of a mission, so to speak. I never really felt pressure growing up to have to live up to that or not have my own identity. My mom was really good about, making me not feel that pressure. I guess I felt or feel an obligation to, be someone that she'd be proud of. Um,
Yeah.
I think carrying her name is a huge thing, especially since it's not a super common name or spelling.
Hmm.
But it really honors at this point not only my aunt, but of course my mom as well and what they went through.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Plus if I don't seek justice for them, who will? So
Yeah. Did
we
the
got to stop
family?
the generational trauma, in its tracks somewhere.
Right. Right. Absolutely. And I think that's an important distinction. I was thinking about that myself and just like, well, did her mother name her that? It's really to honor the loss of her sister. It's not to necessarily, saddle you with like, hey, get this solved. But
Right.
later in life, you guys would kind of take that on together and start looking into this, which I think is only natural and just kind of a way to process that loss. Because despite the fact you never got to know her, I'm sure you felt the whole of her in your life.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was just part of my life. I've never known anything otherwise or different.
Yeah,
Um, my mom was the only one that really kept that memory alive. If she hadn't, I don't think I would really know anything about her or her death,
yeah.
unfortunately. So
Did the family talk about Aunt Katrina? I'm going to refer to her as Aunt Katrina just to make a distinction between you and
that's
her.
fun.
Did the family talk about her often?
No, never. Only my mom. No one else ever did. And usually, if my mom did bring it up around anyone in the family, they would either change the subject or shush her, or, you could just kind of feel the tension um, there, even as a child. I mean, I just knew it was something like off limits to talk about. Maybe it was just because I was there and I was younger and it was not talked about around me, but I don't think so because once I got older, it was still the case. So,
Yeah, yeah. When I was going through the materials, I hit a blog post from Dallas PD, and it had your aunt's last name misspelled all over it. But in speaking to you, it seems like there's kind of a little bit of a reasonable explanation for that. Can you share that with us?
yeah. So it is misspelled on her stuff, yes. However, it's also misspelled on my other aunt's stuff in her case as well. Uh, but it's also not in a way because my grandmother married two men and they both had the same last name. And all five kids, their dad is Mow, Rey, James. And so my grandmother's second and last husband, the one I knew as my grandfather, his was Mowery. And so he brought all his kids from his marriage to the house, and my grandmother brought all her kids from the marriage to the house. And they were kind of like the Brady Bunch, but they all had the same last name, and half of them had Ery and the other half had Rey.
I mean, I just would not believe that. Like if I saw that in a movie script or something, I'd be like, ridiculous. That kind of thing would never happen in reality. And here we are talking about it. It must have been heck on the teachers of the local schools.
I know. I was just gonna say that it's probably crazy, like going through yearbooks and stuff has
Yeah,
been interesting. But it
yeah,
also, I think, um, as my mom's other sister Joanne was more the rambunctious troublemaker one. she, I think, used that to her advantage a little bit and was able to kind of get away with a little bit in terms of, legal system stuff by using the other spelling when it was convenient.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, so
So I understand that Aunt Katrina was in a car accident, and you kind of raised this almost like it could be a factor in terms of her death. So I wanted to just give you an opportunity to kind of share some information about that with us. And I heard about it on the Murder in My Family podcast. Shout out to Mike Morford. But
yeah, he's awesome.
can you tell us about that car accident? And
Yeah, I mean, I actually didn't know about it until I found it in the newspaper. Her car had just hit a piece or a patch of ice, I guess, on a bridge on her way home from work one night at the country club in Kansas City. Um, and I guess it just kind of went over the embankment of the bridge. And we have Kansas City Southern Railroad, um, in Kansas City, which is pretty much the centralized location of where we all are. And Lawrence isn't far away from there, where we all grew up and, lived, and where they're buried now, actually. And so, I guess she got thrown from the vehicle, from what I can tell in the article, and I guess maybe fell unconscious or got knocked out or had amnesia or whiplash or something and doesn't remember some of it because she doesn't remember anything after hitting that ice patch, in the articles, or so it says. But there was a police helicopter flying back to the station and they somehow spotted her taillight or something.
yeah,
And it was kind of like a near death experience or a freak accident. And apparently maybe one or two, if I remember correctly, of the trains had actually passed through that area with her not very far away from it, which I'm surprised that wouldn't, bring someone out of, you know,
yeah, yeah, just the noise
a
of it.
sleep of some kind. Yeah, they're so loud.
Yeah,
And so she's really lucky she didn't die then.
yeah.
And she even actually, it's kind of, nostalgic to read it because in her own words, like, they quote her and she's like, I'm just very thankful to be alive,
Yeah, I
not
mean, and the way
realizing
it's
what was about
written,
to happen. Yeah.
yeah, the way it's written, I mean, like these guys are flying by and they're like, we just happened to look in that direction and caught,
Yep.
the blinking tail light. Like it was just so much a matter of luck that she was even discovered. But she was injured pretty badly in that, right? And that would get her onto some form of prescription opioid.
Oh yeah, she broke part of her back and had to wear like a neck. She was actually in a wheelchair for a couple months
Wow.
after that, which was crazy. So yeah, it's pretty bad.
Did you ever speak to your mother about whatever the argument was about that she hung up on Aunt Katrina?
It wasn't an easy subject to, talk about, I'm sure, for her, but she basically told me that they got into an argument, and that my mom told her if she, you know, didn't have any respect for herself, then my mom wouldn't have any respect for her either, and hung up.
So was it about her
um,
lifestyle then? It was about how she was living?
I have no idea, actually. She did not elaborate,
Okay. Okay.
and I didn't really want to push at that point.
Yeah.
We had kind of already exhausted her memory lane at that rate, or at that point in our conversation.
Gotcha.
um,
Yeah.
and I actually never had any intention of, looking into this case on my own either.
Right.
It just kind of happened almost by accident in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it was actually on a lunch break from work one day. She called me all stressed out and said she had just talked to Dallas PD and she can't figure out who the current detective on the case was. And she was really frustrated and emotional. And yeah, I was kind of just more like in defense of her, like, why are you guys doing this to my mom still? And I just got this feeling. I can't tell you what it was. I just had a feeling they were kind of giving her the runaround
There's
because
also,
they knew she would just, agree to that. Like, oh, okay,
yeah,
oh, okay, thank you, bye. Like,
right.
so.
There is also something that happens, especially with these longer term cases where sometimes there's a handoff between one family member to another, like they get later in life and they're like, I can't take this on anymore. And typically there's someone from the next generation down that will kind of grab that mantle and push forward with it. And I'm thankful that you were there to help her with that, because it probably helped lighten that load. And I know you wouldn't have much more time with her, but lighten the load for her a little bit, plus gave you guys kind of a common ground, a reason to communicate more. So I'm hoping that there was a couple of upsides in terms of you stepping up to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And it wasn't even like a communication thing. I talked to her every single day of my life. Since I was born, we were very close, even though we didn't live in the same state. But
Yeah.
it was the one thing we could work together on because, admittedly, we didn't get along very well.
Yeah.
Mother-daughter kind of arguments, of course, and just kind of the roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah. Well,
Didn't always go very well with me because I get frustrated, but
this is a family that's on a crazy roller coaster when it comes to trauma and,
yeah,
and tragedy. So,
absolutely.
um,
I
did you?
didn't realize the significance of that either until I saw psychiatric records that I had to get from her, many doctors' offices like a year, 2 years after she had passed away. And I had to read back through all 1,200 pages of those in detail. And that was very eye opening.
Wow. Wow. Um, Pulling it back to the case for a moment, did you ever find out why Sergeant Rice told the press that they found evidence that Aunt Katrina might have been using cocaine?
Um, that's a great question as well. I I assume maybe because they found a Crown Royal bag in the trunk with her. I know that a lot of people, especially in the 80s, for one, not only drank Crown Royal, such as my aunts and uncles did.
Yeah.
My grandma made us a blanket out of Crown Royal bags, which is funny and
Hmm.
ironic. But anyway, off topic. But I can only imagine that's probably what it was because I know a lot of people probably kept their substances in those bags a lot.
Yeah. I
Um,
don't know if I saw a list. Was there anything else found in the trunk? I just know about the discovery of the body and kind of the status of that.
yeah, I did get clarification on that from the district attorney's office. And so in the trunk specifically, I know they found a Crown Royal bag, an empty one though.
Okay.
They did say it was empty. And then one male brown, like Sears and Roebuck brand sandal, like a slip-on sandal. But on the sole of it, there was Sears and Roebuck.
Okay.
And it was they did say it was rather large sandal. And my aunt, she was very petite and small. Um, so obviously, I think we can rule out it wasn't hers,
Yeah.
but it could have been the owner of the cars who did, have that alibi. So it could be something or it could be nothing. It is actually one of the physical items that is being tested for DNA evidence of the lab.
Okay. It's so weird that they didn't. I mean, obviously, we're talking about, we're calling him Steve, but the man that she was in some form of relationship with at the time, police had access to them. They effectively wound up clearing him somehow, saying that he had an alibi, but they wouldn't have asked, like, hey, is this your sandal that we found in the trunk?
Great question. I'm sure that's probably in a report somewhere that I'm not allowed to see.
Yeah. 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 And
It's
that's,
frustrating.
yeah, I mean, the most frustrating thing about this case, I think, is just trying. Well, first of all, the most frustrating is the classification and that it just hasn't been deemed a homicide. Second most frustrating is medical examiner's report really not giving us any clarification as to how exactly she died. On top of that, assuming the worst, and this does seem like her body was dumped there, we know the toxicology comes back and there's no drugs in her system. So if someone killed her, why would they have killed her? She's not the type of person that's going to have thousands of dollars on her. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting you're mentioning the Crown Royal bag because that's making me wonder if maybe she was selling, and we know that she did have access to some of those prescription medications. Do you have any confirmation? Was she actually involved in any form of drug dealing or anything like that?
I mean, she probably knew people that were, as most people usually do at that age. They have an acquaintance or a friend or something, but I don't think, if anything, it was the kind of, volume of substance, use or selling or anything of that matter that would make it worth killing someone over or dumping someone's body like that over. I don't think it was that kind of like amount of anything. I think it was, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, if someone wanted, her prescription or something like that, I mean, that's a stick up or maybe a simple assault or something like that. Yeah, like why are you going to murder someone and hide their body under those
Well, it seems
conditions?
to me like that might not have been the goal for the ending place. It seems as though maybe the vehicle stopped there, um, but it was meant to dump the body elsewhere, just based, in my opinion, on how it was wrapped. Because she was wrapped in the sheet, but she was wrapped very, very tightly in the sheet, like 3 times around type wrapped. Like, and she had a belt around her neck directly on the skin, and she also had a belt around her neck over the sheet, like it was holding it in place.
Right, right.
And again, she was really petite, so it's not like she's hard to carry anyways, or it would have been difficult even if it was just one person.
That's a good point. Like they could have been looking for just a random dumpster somewhere or a
Or
waterway or
yeah, or a field even, or like a
yeah,
burying, ground of some kind or anything.
yeah,
So I think maybe, I don't know if something happened on the way, or I'm not even honestly 100% convinced that whoever it was that was driving the vehicle knew there was even a body in the trunk.
right,
um,
right.
because it
Hmm.
could have, I mean, the options are endless.
Yeah,
We can speculate all day. Who really knows? But,
yeah.
um, they're not ruled out, I guess, for me anyway.
Do we know if a sexual assault kit was processed?
Yes.
And do we know the findings on that?
Yeah, nothing.
Nothing found to confirm a
Mm-mm.
sexual assault.
Yes. I
Okay.
mean, there still could have been one, I guess, technically. Again, the timing for the time period, I'm not sure how sensitive their testing kits really were, or, if the process was different, or, you just never really know. But,
Yeah.
and obviously there weren't cameras and technology, like, you know, anyway.
Right.
So,
Right. Okay.
but
Uh,
I will say that she was locked in the trunk. So, and I don't mean locked like the trunk was shut. I mean like locked with a key from the outside of the trunk
yeah.
with, so this is like a car that, you can shut the trunk and it latches, but you can also lock it in those older vehicles,
Right.
and so, and the keys were never found.
Yeah, and the keys would sometimes be a different key from the key that would start the engine.
Yes, that's a very good point too.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So I'm not sure where those keys went. And if there was evidence of drug use in the vehicle, it wouldn't have lasted long in that part of town, that's for sure, especially if it was in sight or
Hmm.
viewable, which it wasn't. I do know there was also a sweater found in the back seat of the vehicle.
Sweater. Do we know details about it? Man, woman?
I think it was hers,
Oh, okay. Okay.
which could make sense, if she was the one driving it around at that time.
Yeah.
Although I don't know about in June,
Yeah. Yeah.
but yeah, and that is also another piece of evidence of the lab.
So, in looking through your communication of when you get involved with this and you're trying to request records, I know that you file a Freedom of Information Act request. You get in touch with the Dallas Homicide Unit, and they tell you they don't have the file and they don't have access to non-murder files. So, and
Yeah.
this is happening around 2020, right?
2021, probably. Yeah. My
Okay.
mom died in November of 2020. So I kind of just, took the time to mourn my mom at that point. And coincidentally, I also had COVID at that point too. Um,
Yeah.
and so, it was kind of, and everyone was pretty much ordered to be confined in their house. I couldn't even leave the house to go to a gas station. Like I was ordered by the state in an official like letter, like not to leave my house. It
Hmm.
was kind of crazy. So I had to arrange my mom's, funeral home stuff and all that and stuff from literally my house. So
Yeah.
that wasn't exactly easy, especially with all the funeral homes being full from COVID patients. So,
Right. Right.
um,
So you kind of go through this initial zig in terms of trying to get the records. Then I see requests that you kicked off in 2022, and these requests are being rejected because they're saying that the homicide department is saying that the case is open.
exactly.
So is this being investigated as a homicide or not? Do we know at this point?
I don't even think they know.
It's unbelievable. Like
It
even
is.
even the blog post that they did in 2023, the word homicide is nowhere on it.
Right. They are very careful on that part of it for sure. I guess a liability issue, I'm sure.
Isn't there any course of action? Like, can't they have a forensic pathologist kind of review the Emmy's work and make some type of redetermination or something?
Oh yeah, I'm sure they can if they want it, if they want to.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
But
really weird that this case is stuck in that spot. And I think it's a big part because
it's
of it.
almost yeah, it's almost like in a gray area that no one really knows, or it's just kind of like stuck in between.
Yeah.
And even on the second report that I received, so I got the original police report that was heavily redacted and pretty much useless. It was stuff I already knew.
Yeah.
I appealed it to the attorney general's office of the state, and the city attorney got involved and tried to block my request for the appeal. And they did at first, but then I appealed again, and they released the supplemental report, which on the top left of it is classified right on it as murder. And that was the day after her body was found. So it's interesting.
So, in looking through the materials, it looks like there's four persons of interest who have been identified. We've already talked about a few of them. The boyfriend, who we're calling Steve, which I know in talking to you, they did have some alibi. Do you know how strong that alibi was?
Airtight, I quote.
Airtight.
um,
Okay.
Whatever that means, I guess.
Okay.
Would
Um,
seem that means pretty solid, but
yeah.
I don't know what it was. So
Yeah, I mean, airtight, I would consider like we've got video footage or, we've got some financial records that kind of put them in a particular place at a particular time or something like that.
well, it was also interesting in the newspaper that they said all the car owners had been cooperating, all 4 or 5 of them, or whatever that it said, except
Right, right.
for the last one, I guess, which had to have obviously been the current owner.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and in terms of looking for this mysterious motive, like knowing that she's in some form of relationship with this guy, she's borrowing his car, knowing the stats about intimate partner, homicide, and violence, like things are looking in Steve's direction pretty strongly. So it's interesting to me that they've found an alibi that they consider airtight on that front. But we
Well, I
know,
don't think as ridiculous as married Steve might be, I don't think he's ignorant and, no, I don't think he's dumb enough to leave the suspect that he is known to have, had some kind of relationship with in the back of his own vehicle.
it's a good point. It's a
And
good
I
point.
know that he also lived within like a mile of where that car was found as well.
Oh, well, that now it's not a
Mm-hmm.
good point because that's another thing I was wondering is
Yeah.
the location. Like, because if someone takes the car there, they're either getting a ride from somewhere else, from someone else to get away from there, unless they live close by. So
Exactly.
yeah, 1 mile, you're talking, 15, 20-minute walk for him and he's home.
And it might have been less actually, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And all the addresses that he's had around that time period are all within like a mile of
Okay.
that location.
Gotcha. So I know there was a person that was referred to as Pee Wee. Your mother really thought he might be involved in this in some way. And I believe you figured out who he is, right?
Yeah, yeah, my mom knew who he was.
Okay. Okay. Was he ever questioned?
Um, I have not been able to confirm that.
Okay. Okay.
So, apparently not, according to my mom, but I'm not sure if she ever confirmed that for sure or not. I did track him down in Dallas the year after, in their actual, Dallas County jail for murder, actually.
Wow.
So I can't believe they couldn't find him if they were actually looking, because he would have literally been right under their noses.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. We've got a third person who we're referring to as Dan. He's the guy that kicked down the door. Do we know who he is or how he was in Catrina's life?
I don't. I know she had written in a statement to the police that they were friends before, all of that. And so
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
not sure. He was also married and didn't live far from where her apartment was on that police report. In fact, so also less than a mile from where her apartment was that he kicked the door in at.
Okay. Okay. But not the drop location, not where the car was found. So,
Correct.
okay. Eh,
However, he also did that with a loaded firearm that was literally like locked, loaded, and ready. Like I do believe he had the intent of, I don't think it was it for intimidation purposes. Otherwise, it probably wouldn't have been loaded with 9 live rounds.
yeah. Yeah.
I could be wrong though, obviously, sure. But I think that if the police wouldn't have intervened, it might not have had the same outcome.
Who is the fourth person? And I don't want to give their name, but in terms of relationship to her, who's the fourth person?
I'm not sure.
Okay, it's just a name that's appearing in the reports. Basically, is another person that's being looked
It
at.
was it was brought up in a conversation, yes, with the district attorney's office, but law enforcement has never given me any information about that. I did get a copy of the police report from that one incident we discussed, but
Okay.
that's about it.
Do any one of these persons of interest stand out to you?
Yeah,
Are you able to share that with us?
I mean, yeah, I think there was more than one person involved. Personally, um, I think that it was, one of one, maybe two of the stronger suspects. I think that they really need to look into the link or relationships or acquaintance status or, friends of friends within those suspects personally, and how they might know each other. Because I do feel like this was, you know, maybe someone killed her and the other person like transported, or, I think in it, even if they didn't, I think someone still knows more than is let on. So
Yeah, you're making me think of like it'd be interesting if someone was trying to get back at Steve in some way, and they're like, knowing it's his car, yeah, let's go ahead and leave her body in there, make sure that it's
yeah,
found
yeah,
somewhere.
like set them up, like kind of in a sense. So I've definitely considered any and every like possibility.
Yeah.
I can't like confirm anything specifically, but I can rule things out that it's not in some ways. So that's been helpful.
Yeah, there's another interesting dynamic here. Sometimes we speak to even law enforcement will sometimes make recommendations to families about, hey, you should get a private investigator because they can kind of do things that we can't do. Um, Here, we kind of have you investigating this. Is there an information share going on between you and law enforcement? Are you kind of passing along these pieces of social information that you're finding?
Yes,
Okay, good.
I am. However, um, some of the stuff that I have found, they did not know or have, and so they're just it's seemingly in this. I don't know. I don't know. Let me get back to you. I don't know. Let me pass this along to another investigator or another detective,
Okay.
or we'll get back with you when we find out more. Or it's just so I've kind of resorted to, I guess, in a sense, being my own investigator, because no one else seems to be able to kind of link things like I can in this case, just because I know the details that aren't to a normal person or detective relevant, but they are relevant.
Yeah, and that's a weird relationship because you know the information flow isn't going to go the other way. Like they're not going to let you in all of a sudden and like, oh, well, you've given us some info. Here's a bunch of stuff we know. So
Exactly. And
yeah,
they have kind of given me info unknowingly, um, in some of their responses or reactions, or the ways they've reacted to some of the information that has kind of given me what I needed to know in a sense.
yeah, yeah. So I saw that a few search warrants have been served on this case recently. Can you share with us what information was gathered from that? What's happening with it?
That was a long work in progress from start to finish. Probably took a year and a half, 2 years, probably. The judge obviously had to sign off on it, and we had to locate the evidence, which was surprisingly located um, in two different locations. And so they did find them, and obviously I can only know so much of the details.
Yeah.
um, and so that stuff is all at the lab.
Okay. Um, is there anything really compelling about that? Like, are we looking for DNA? Is it an item that we think is, from someone that was involved in this in some way, or?
Well, the sweater was completed last year, that they found in the back seat, and they only found X DNA, so female
Mhm.
DNA,
Okay.
chromosomes, which for me doesn't really tell me much other than she probably had it on at some point.
Right.
But it just really told me that, you know, it doesn't really tell me much except that it could be a female suspect, or it could have just been her sweater.
Yeah. Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not really sure why that was part of the evidence that was tested or even kept for testing or any evidence without keeping the sheet or the belt.
Did they
You would
not keep
think
that
so.
stuff?
No.
Oh my God. Because even the description says that the sheets were stained. Like you would think there's
Yep.
evidence to test in that. Wow.
Yep, you would think. So I'm not sure why they kept some of the stuff they did, like the Crown Royal bag, but
Yeah. That's
I don't know.
unbelievable. Unbelievable.
Yeah, exactly. I concur with that. And there was also four um single hair shafts
Okay.
um that were kept from the crime scene and somehow I guess ruled out as not hers. I don't know if that's like by the naked eye or how they determined that, or if it was like a different ethnic background, kind of
Sure.
uh, you know, look or something. I'm not sure exactly, but I'm sure there's ways to be able to tell that. Um, However, the four hair shafts don't have roots.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they were sent to a more advanced lab for mitochondrial DNA testing.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think there's ways around that now. You don't have to have the root necessarily, but I know
No,
it.
you don't. And there are ways around it. However, they're not always conclusive
Right. Right.
that way.
Yeah.
But every time you test it, it kind of dilutes what is testable
Yep.
each time. And so, you don't want to do it too much because then you really might not get any answers when it does advance in the future.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, they are
So,
they're doing familial DNA testing on that to get a suspect profile, or at least their family or their maternal line to confirm.
okay. So we've got some hope in those pieces of information and those
Yeah,
those pieces
absolutely.
of evidence. Yeah.
Now, when they'll ever be completed is another question.
Right. Right. Yeah.
They,
Backlog,
they've
right?
been they've been at the lab since June or July of 2023.
Yeah. All right. So, what are the next steps for you in terms of all this? Are you seeing any other pockets of information you can reach out to? Are you kind of at a point where you felt like you've looked in every which way that you can?
I mean, I'm never at a standstill that way. I'm always a step ahead, usually, from law enforcement. um, to be honest,
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of steps that can be taken. I know that they're kind of just waiting on DNA, but I don't necessarily believe that DNA is needed to solve this case personally. I think it's honestly an easier case to solve with all the information.
Well, the thing that's
Um,
troubling about it is, like, let's say the DNA comes back and they're like, okay, we can point it back to person of interest number 3. Okay, it's person of interest number 3. Now what? We still don't have a homicide determination. We still don't have a medical examiner that's saying this is how she died. She was definitely killed. Like, we're still not quite in the ballpark of anything prosecutable.
well, honestly, I think they have kind of unofficially changed that determination. And honestly, I'll give them credit where it's due. The current detectives and stuff, they don't personally know the case, in the time period and whatnot. So they are probably also, in some senses, looking back like, how the hell did they determine this wasn't a homicide? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
and I've kind of got that vibe a little bit on some conversations. So I think that it's like unofficially, like official in a sense, I guess.
I would think so, because they've sent you documentation that says they're not going to give you a record because it's an active homicide investigation. Like,
Exactly.
it's.
Exactly.
I just hope there isn't much more pushing and fighting that you have to do, and this kind of zigzag back and forth that you've been going through, in terms of keeping the progress going. That's what I'm hopeful for. But I guess we're just going to
I'm
have to
hopeful
see.
too,
Yeah,
but I can assure you that it's a balance for sure, but I'm not gonna stop.
yeah,
I'll push them for as long as I'm alive, for as long as it takes, even if it never does come, to that conclusion, it won't be because of lack of trying. But I also can't let it take over my entire life because I have children as well.
absolutely. Yeah,
And it is a balance and it is exhausting and it does take away from, my time, you know, working or career wise or my children and whatnot. So it
yeah.
is a balance.
Yeah, and I think in a way it's become more than just, your mother was honoring her sister by giving you the name Catrina. These actions and these steps that you're taking to learn about what happened to Catrina are now honoring not only her but your mother and Joanne also. I mean, it's just it's
It's
such a
the
big
least I can do,
yeah,
truly.
it's such a big expression of how much you care about your family, and I'm thankful that you're shining in that way, and I do hope that this all falls together for you very soon.
Thank you. Me too. I think it's fallen together a lot more than I ever thought it would, even now.
Yeah,
The things I have found. It seems like it's taken forever, but in the grand light of things, it hasn't taken all that long in comparison to some cases, that have been actively investigated for so long. I just actively investigated this case since 2020, and look how far we've come.
yeah, yeah. It's a great way to look at it. Catrina, please keep me up to date with any big developments on this. I want to hear more from you. Okay.
Absolutely. I will.
Another big thank you to Catrina Marshall for joining us here today and for helping us with all the information she provided. We couldn't have even covered this case if it wasn't for the info that she's uncovered and shared with us. So thank you so much, Catrina. If you are the person that happens to have information that can help move this case forward, please contact the Dallas PD Homicide Unit at 214-671-3661. Also, a big thank you to our supporters that keep us here at the channel. You might notice we run these with extremely limited ads. We can only do that because of our amazing supporters. A big thank you to PayPal supporters Angela Welch Sola, Amanda Beard, Jennifer Wilson, Larissa Mertshank, and Hillary Green. Of course, we've also got some new patrons. Thank you, Cheryl Carter and Gary Howard. And a big thank you to Lindsay Morgan for increasing your pledge. If you'd like to join that team of supporters, please visit LordanArts.com. There, you can sign up for Patreon, sign up for PayPal, buy merchandise, or even just buy us a coffee like Ann Peters recently did. We appreciate all of your support as we continue helping these families in these very tough situations. Take care, everyone. Have a wonderful weekend, and please join us back here next week for more on the LordanArts channel.